Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey had a busted 2024 season and are getting older, but they have plenty left in the tank and can be elite producers in 2025. We discuss bounce back candidates at wide receiver and running back on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst for NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. We are getting into bounce back candidates at the wide receiver and running back position. We already did quarterbacks and tight ends on yesterday's show. So guys that really disappointed this year that we either think can bounce back or maybe we think they won't. We can give our argument for either side for these guys. We have to start with the two biggest names that busted the most this season. It was Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey. Now with McCaffrey, it was mostly due to injury. Tyreek Hill, we don't really know if it was due to injury or not because he says he has that wrist thing, but who knows. But Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 35 in points per game in 2024, after being the wide receiver 1 in 2023 and the wide receiver 3 in 2022. Now he turns 30 in March. Is it just the age that did him in, or will he be perfectly fine and bounce back next season?
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill is a complicated case because we didn't know if he was going to be traded or asked for trade, but then they had a meeting between him and the uppers of the Dolphins, the officials, and it came to a conclusion. It looks like he wants to stay put. He didn't ask for a trade. We've had some of those things happen of late with Myles Garrett and Cooper Kupp. So for now, it looks like Tyreek Hill is going to be in a Dolphins uniform for at least one more. So he is getting older, and Michelle's right about that. There's some wear and tear on this guy. He's had some soft tissue injuries in the past, and I don't know if it all contributed to his slowing down. I think the big contribution was Tua Tagovailoa was off and he was hurt, and Waddle wasn't much of a contributor. And then all of a sudden, Mike McDaniel decided to compress this passing game quite a bit. We're maybe worried about Tua and holding onto the ball too long and not getting out and then getting more hits on him, right? So I think there was a design of this offense where it kind of went into a shell. It got really conservative. You had Smith being a key part at tight end. You had Devin Etienne getting a lot of checkdowns here instead of trying to push the ball downfield or get Tyreek Hill in space with a lot of speed to make some big plays, right? So it was just very bizarre given what we'd seen the year before. And again, the only explanation is the quarterback situation was bad. Tyreek was maybe not committed to being totally there or a little bit banged up and didn't let people on. So those are the only explanations I have. But that said, are the wear and Father Time kind of bouncing against that? And like, where do we meet here in the middle? So do I think he's going to finish at wide receiver 33 again? No. Do I think he's going to go skyrocket back into wide receiver 10 or above? No. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think you're going to see Tyreek Hill produce in the middle. I think the Dolphins need to look at a little bit more receiving help at this point to maybe develop a young third guy. I mean, they've tried different dudes there. It doesn't work. Jonah is not going to be a consistent part of this offense. So I think he has some upside, but I'm a little bit worried about racking up the touchdowns that he needs, the Dolphins offense in general, but the talent is there, the experience is there to still produce. I just wouldn't be super aggressive and say he's back as a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, maybe not wide receiver 1, but I'm willing to say he can be a top 5 wide receiver again. Like,
Okay.
I don't think the drop off, but just is that crazy just because he's 20, like he was 29. Like he's still young enough to put up big numbers. This is his worst year in his career in fantasy points, even worse than his rookie season when he averaged 37 receiving yards per game. He still averaged fewer fantasy points per game than that rookie season this past year. I think he comes back to life. That the Dolphins offense was so incredibly bad. I mean, the targets were going to Etienne and Jonnu Smith and not moving the ball very much at all, right? He had 50 fewer targets in 2024 than in 2023 and 2022. He was getting 170 targets. Like, I think those come back up. There's just something wrong with this team and this offense this year. I have trust in him. And I think it'll be a big bounce back year. Maybe not wide receiver 1, but that's hard for anyone to repeat, right? But top 5, top 7, something like that. I do expect Tyreek Hill to be back to form next year. Now with Christian McCaffrey, age is a little bit more scary with running backs, right? And he'll be 29 in June. He barely played this year. And when he did play, he didn't score touchdowns, right? And we're so used to him scoring touchdowns. He had 0 touchdowns in his 4 games played, really 3.5. But he was a running back 1 in 2023 by far, running back 2 in 2022. And then just completely this is what we have to worry about. That Achilles injury. It's not really an easy one to fix. It's not like he tore it, right? Or anything like that. It's just like tendonitis. It can flare up whenever. How will we know if it's fixed? That's my biggest concern. But, if he can get that under control, yeah, I'm sure Christian McCaffrey can bounce back big next year.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, there were injury concerns of the whole trade to the 49ers. I mean, he had some trouble staying healthy for the Panthers. And that was the biggest question. Would he stay healthy? We saw what happened when he stayed fully healthy. He exploded and was the best back in the league in 2023. Then the injuries started to pile up. I think the frustration was we didn't know a lot about the injuries, right? And they kind of compounded as we went throughout the season. Like, okay, they were bad enough that he wasn't out there when we all expected him to deliver and follow that. And again, this just tells you a little bit, again, when you go back to Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, and now McCaffrey, when you have this massive volume, there is going to be some regression and some attrition. And so, again, I'm not saying Saquon Barkley is going to suddenly drop and fall off a cliff, but I think it's real, right? Especially if you have a history of injuries. And McCaffrey had it, Barkley has them as well, right? So it's a concern when you take on this workload. Now, what happens is then the workload calms down the next year, and now you're fresh legs all of a sudden because he has been out there. And what did we see? Josh Jacobs suddenly ran with a lot more juice this year, right, than we saw last year because he was fresh and he might have just been curbed a little bit. So to say McCaffrey is done is a little bit premature. I think maybe he has 1 or 2 more really good years if he can stay healthy. But the offense is great. Nothing is changing there. He's explosive. He's a centerpiece. So I feel a lot more confident that McCaffrey ascending back to an elite level than Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern will be the offensive line. It was not good at run blocking this year. Their interior offensive line,
they'll upgrade it, yeah.
Aaron Banks and Jake Brendel are 2 of the worst interior offensive line you could have in this league as starters. Aaron Banks is a free agent. We'll see how they replace him. And Jake Brendel, I do fully believe that they will upgrade at center, hopefully. But got to keep your eyes on that because if they don't upgrade their interior offensive line, it's hard to really say Christian McCaffrey could be, top 1 or 2 again. But he still has that in him if they do fix up that line. We are going to get into some more. We're going to start with some more wide receiver bounce back candidates and then get to a couple more running backs to finish today's show. We're going to take a quick break and dig into it. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You get a panorama view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. It's very, very easy app to use and very quick. 2 taps and you're set. And they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. They have event cancellation protection, 24-hour return guarantee, and even job loss assurance. You get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. We have 2 wide receivers here that dealt with injuries, and then 1 that just dealt with a very inconsistent offense. So the 2 guys that dealt with injuries, Brandon Ayuk and Chris Olave. But it's not like either of them were taking over the world before injuries, right? Especially Brandon Ayuk was really struggling. He had 0 touchdowns on the season in his 7 games played, only 374 yards. And that's after a really huge breakout year in 2023 when he had 1,300 yards and was wide receiver 14 in fantasy points per game. Now he's coming off a torn ACL and MCL, have it in week 7. So hopefully that's enough time he can be ready for next year. What are you more worried about, the injury or the lack of production prior to the injury?
I think it's more the injury. I think we've seen Brandon Ayuk's talent, and we know his chemistry with Brock Purdy. We know there's a potential that Debo Samuel could be moving on, and that would reestablish him as clearly the number one, maybe that role just mentally, right? Saying you're the alpha on this team now. Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are more of the complementary receivers, right? So maybe just mentally that will get him focused again. I think he's a very confident kid. I think he's loaded with talent here. And I think Purdy and Ayuk have something special going on. So again, we're going to watch the updates on his injury rehab and see how it goes and make sure he's on track here to be fully healthy and at full speed, right? That's what we want. He's a field stretcher. He can make those big plays in week one, but he's a complete receiver. So I feel confident again about the 49ers offense in general. It's just too good, right? I think they'll realize, look, we need to upgrade at multiple positions in the offensive line. We need to do this and get our offense back up to speed if we're going to compete and stay that course for a Super Bowl window.
Yeah, and hopefully his targets can increase once really expect Evo to be gone off this offense, open it up more downfield, and that will be huge for Ayuk. But there is, like I always say, it normally takes the full year after the ACL tear to get really back. So I won't be surprised if next year he has another like kind of disappointing fantasy season. So I don't know if I'm going to be all in on Ayuk for a bounce back. I think he could be okay. And then maybe it's 2026 where we can see him really explode back to what we saw in 2023. Now, Chris Olave, he's a lot younger than Brandon Ayuk, actually. Ayuk turns 27 in March. Chris Olave is 24, turns 25 in June. He was wide receiver 21 in points per game in 2023. And then that fell off big time this year with only averaging 7.6 points per game. Really kind of not useful even prior to the injury. Had a couple good games in there. A lot of down games, though, as well. What do we do with him? Because is it still Derek Carr with the Saints? We can see his talent. He's clearly the wide receiver one on this team. And when Derek Carr and him do connect, he does have big games. It's just Carr's inconsistent. Olave and him are always on the same page. And if it's not Carr, then who is it going to be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we also are waiting to see if Kellen Moore indeed is the Saints coach. We expect that to be the case based on the Eagles' quiet nature on this and the Saints. So we might have an answer finally on what kind of offense they're operating here. And if you look at going back to Dallas, where Kellen Moore was, he was the quarterback there, the offense coordinator. We saw the emergence of CeeDee Lamb there as a young receiver, so that was good. The Chargers, it was a tough situation for him, but with the Eagles, look, you say the A.J. Brown numbers were a little bit concerning, but it was a lot to do with A.J. Brown, right? I think Chris Olave will be treated as a full alpha in this offense by Moore, if that's indeed the coach. So when I look at it, Olave has a lot of talent. I thought he might think about retiring with all the issues that he was having, and it doesn't appear to be the case at this point. So I think he's a strong bounce-back candidate. He's just too talented. I mean, we kind of want these guys, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, came in the league together. We want them to have better quarterback situations, consistency, because the talent is absolutely there for this guy to produce. And we'll see about Rashid Shaheed. Remember, his season was cut short with injury as well. So maybe they need to rely more on Olave, who's having a more linear issue with the concussions and all that. So when I look at it, I think Olave has to be treated more like a number one. Let's hope it's someone like Moore who's going to feed one guy quite a bit, like whether it's a running back or wide receiver. I think Olave is going to be the focal point of their offense. So I do like it. We just have to see a little bit more, and I think we'll get some of those answers on the scheme and the quarterback here pretty soon.
Yeah, with Olave, I think when we say bounce back, it's bounce back to like that wide receiver 20 status, right? I don't think he's going to be a top 12 wide receiver unless he has like this amazing quarterback that comes in. But bounce back from not being 7.5 points per game, right, to being a usable fantasy asset. I definitely think he can do that. Now, this guy, I have the most optimism that he can bounce back. DJ Moore. He turns 28 in April, so still plenty young enough. He was the wide receiver 10 in points per game in 2023, and then that dropped to wide receiver 32 in 2024. He definitely broke out his first year with the Bears, and that was with Justin Fields, and he had his 8 touchdowns and 1,364 yards, and we thought, oh, man, Caleb Williams coming in. Could he do more? No. With the rookie, it went way down to 966 yards and 6 touchdowns still, but he still got the same amount of targets that he got the year before, so he's plenty Like he's going to still be the center point of this offense with Rome Odunze. You would expect to be a lot more used as well. And now he has Ben Johnson. So that's the point here where you feel like, yes, he can definitely bounce back. Top 10 wide receiver? Maybe not, but I do think he's going to be a really, really solid wide receiver too, somewhere in that like 12 to 15 range next year.
Yeah, we really said, how's it going to distribute between these receivers? Because you had Rome Odunze in the first round pick, you had Keenan Allen, you had DJ Moore. It turned out that this situation wasn't great for all of them. I mean, somebody didn't even stand out and pull ahead. Part of that was Caleb Williams' struggles and just being sacked a lot. Part of it was the dysfunctional play calling that we had all season long between Shane Waldron and Thomas Brown. It just was not pretty. And then DJ Moore was checked out. We know that, right? He didn't want to be a part of this mess anymore. And I think a lot of Bears players felt the same way when you look at their attitudes and all that. So everyone want to look at, why is DJ Moore doing this? They need him for a rookie quarterback, and I think he just didn't like the way the direction was going. Now, you got to be excited. You got a new OC. You've got a potential to protect your quarterback much better as they invest in the offensive line here. Williams should deliver the ball more plenty. Then Keenan Allen could also be gone. So I'm not sure Moore was thrilled about them adding another veteran in Allen when they were getting Odunze already in the first round. So if it's down to these two guys and then Cole Kmet kind of sides and gets used as a third target, that means there's going to be a drop-off between Moore and Odunze and Kmet. And Keenan Allen's not going to be there mucking up like the target volume for the wide receiver. So that alone could be good for DJ Moore, as well as just being more committed, buying in to an actual exciting, innovative, creative offense, which they definitely will have with Johnson and his coaching staff.
Yeah, I do expect, as long as Keenan Allen's not re-signed. I think if Allen re-signs, that puts the wrench in it again, where it's divided by three wide receivers. But if it's just DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, I like both to be really good assets next year under Ben Johnson, as long as Caleb Williams can make that big step forward under Ben Johnson, and he is what we think he can be. We are going to get into 3 running back candidates that I don't know if we think they're going to bounce back. I'm going to try to give my reasonings as to why, especially for the first one, because just like DJ Moore, he was stuck on a terrible team and had a pretty bad attitude about it. We'll get into those 3 candidates right after a quick break.
This episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by PrizePicks. Yeah, we'll focus on the big game here. It's almost here between the Chiefs and Eagles. There's no better way to make it even more exciting for you than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports with more than 10 million members, billions in winnings awarded. PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get into the action. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right. And take advantage of this free pick. There's always one for these big games, and there's one with Patrick Mahomes. Only needs to throw for 1 yard for you to win. Pair that with anything you're looking for. We'll give you some suggestions on that with another correct pick, or just get some multiple picks there to multiply your money. We'll have it, and you'll be cashing out then for sure. Check out the promo tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's only at PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, Michelle, time to wrap up. Going back to running backs, we talked about Christian McCaffrey. We've got 3 more running backs we want to talk about here with possible rebound candidates. Don't forget, we'll be diving in to the Super Bowl here the rest of the week. So getting excited for that, all the good stuff, props, everything you can look at, players that we want to target for big games on Sunday. Now, Travis Etienne is not playing on Sunday. He hardly played for the Jaguars this season. These are 3 guys that are all in the range, I'll say, after RB40. Travis Etienne finished at RB43 on average in half-point PPR. Ugly season. I don't think it's going to get better, Michelle.
You know what? I do. And
okay,
we said after last year in 2023, running back 6 in fantasy points per game, we didn't like him to be that high again, right? We thought he was going to fall off a bit. I don't think either of us saw running back 40. He was running back 41 among guys that played at least 4 games in points per game. I don't think any of us expected that big of a drop off. I will say the Jaguars were a mess this year. Trevor Lawrence was injured again. Etienne was not getting the workload he probably wanted with Tank Bigsby getting much. You could see it. He wasn't trying at all. He was just miserable playing on this team and this offense. He didn't like it. Now, that's not necessarily a great quality to have in, a player if it's like your favorite football team or, if you're the owner or GM or anything like that. So maybe they don't re-sign him, but he's still going to be here the next year. I still think he's the most talented running back on the team. He gets Liam Cohen, who did great things with Bucky Irving. So I do expect him to bounce back. I don't think you just go from a guy that has extreme explosiveness, scored 11 rushing touchdowns in 2023, had 476 receiving yards in 2023 to just like he just wasn't used. He was bad when he was used because he wasn't really trying. I do think Travis Etienne, who just turned 26 years old, still has plenty in the tank. And I still think he could be a top 12 fantasy running back in 2025.
I'm glad you said the word plenty in the tank, because I'm all about Tank Bigsby. When you look at this situation, you look at the Bucky Irving, Rachaad White part 2. And when I say that, I think, who does Etienne remind you more of? It's Rachaad White. I mean, they don't use him in the passing game as much. Rachaad White had some big plays, but when he was kind of bottled up, it was just hard to watch him run, right? And I think that effort that Tank Bigsby put in, I mean, he was running hard. He had some big runs. I don't think he's a total zero in the passing game either. But I just think Liam Cohen, I think this is just chance, like, who bought in, who didn't buy in last year, kind of rebooting the culture of this organization. And look, Etienne could have checked out, but, I mean, his team needed him at that point, right? Your quarterback, your friend goes down. Like, you need to help Mac Jones and do some things here and run with some conviction here. You're a first-round pick. So I think maybe we learned a lesson, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and now we're learning this with Travis Etienne. Don't force these guys. And then I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Etienne were going to be used more. Okay, they're Alvin Kamara types where they're going to be used in the receiving game. I think they've been misfits. That's why we saw the Chiefs give up on Edwards-Helaire, because they tried to make him something he wasn't as a runner. And I don't think Travis Etienne is supposed to be a closer. I don't see a path to a lot of touchdowns, right? If Bigsby is the stronger back and can finish here. So I don't know. Like, I figure as a first-round pick, this guy should have done a lot more, and we've seen plenty of it. And it's not manifested except for 1 year where things kind of all aligned. But I don't see that aligning again, especially with the new coaching staff having to kind of weigh in, who's out in terms of who are his guys going forward.
I do feel like you're being a little harsh on him, right? Like he's only played 3 seasons, and 2 of them he's had over 1,400 rushing or 1,400 scrimmage yards, and one of them he had 12 scrimmage touchdowns. So it's like he was a running back 6 just 2 years ago. So I think you're being a little harsh on him, giving too much credit to Tank Bigsby, who has truly shown very little in his career. So I don't know. Etienne's better. I think
it's not a situation I want to dive into. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like banging the table for the Jaguars backfield.
I know. I don't know. It's not a guy I thought I was going to be banging the table for, but maybe I will. If everyone's thinking like you, maybe I will be banging the table just to say he's not going to be so bad, guys. Come on. I think he can bounce back. Now, Isaiah Pacheco, let's get to him because he turns 26 in March. He runs a lot like your guy, Tank Bigsby. He's just like those effort guys, right? And I do think those effort guys, they don't last too long in the NFL. Like James Conner's the one effort guy I can think of, but I still think Conner's more talented than either Pacheco or Tank Bigsby. It's kind of like, Jordan Mason started off hot this year because of how hard he runs. It kind of just wears off as the year goes on. But Pacheco, running back 42 in points per game among guys that played at least 4 games this year, was running back 15 in points per game in 2023. So we saw a big drop off, and it only got worse as the year went on, right? And even in these playoffs, they're not utilizing him like at all. And you got Kareem Hunt there outplaying him. It wasn't so bad to start the year. He was getting most of the snaps in weeks 1 and 2. He had 2 solid enough fantasy games, 14.8 and 13.6 points. Then the injury happened. So is it just the injury that's holding him back and he'll be back and bounce back next year? Or is the team going to look to replace him? I'm in the middle.
Yeah, we've had some first round disappointments, and then the back end guys, like I talked about it, right? The guys like James Robinson, an undrafted guy who started off the bank, speaking of the Jaguars, and then kind of faded really fast. It's really hard for these guys to sustain. I think Dameon Pierce is another good example of it. again, there are some limitations and things that pop up for these later round picks. Now, there are some exceptions. I mean, Kyren Williams was a pretty good value here for the Rams, and they can go in that direction once they have a body of work. But Pacheco's injury, he didn't seem like the same type of runner. It was a bit tentative, didn't really finish. I thought he had a chance to have a big season. It was kind of an important season to prove himself, and he didn't really do it. I mean, Kareem Hunt coming in and just doing well down the stretch when both of them were healthy, like it's a little bit concerning. And again, you're right. He does kind of impress coaches with his running style, and I could be looking at that with Bigsby. But again, here the coaching situation has not changed, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing. There's not going to be, why is there going to be a culture change in Kansas City when they keep winning, right? They're just going to put the best players out there. So I'm concerned with Pacheco. They could just move on and draft yet another guy that's someone you plug and play here. And look, if Hunt can plug and play and produce and outproduce him in key situations, why can't anyone else? I mean, he's only a 7th round pick. So they can't be totally thrilled about the future of Pacheco. And like, look, Chiefs are not going to invest where they don't need to. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the backfield. But I think Pacheco is going to get some really strong competition.
Yeah, I tend to agree. If he is a starter next year, right, and he is healthy, then yes, he's going to rebound a bit. I never really liked Pacheco as a fantasy asset anyways. I always thought he was just kind of mid, and I never really wanted him on my team. So I'm not going to be, fighting for him in any drafts. Now, Nick Chubb, this is a big one because the last time we saw Nick Chubb healthy was in 2022, and he was a running back 6 in points per game. Then he got injured insanely fast in 2023. Terrible knee injury, missed the whole season, comes back this year, running back 40 in points per game among guys who play 4 games this year. So I don't know, right? Because he turns 30. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't turn 30 until late December, so he'll be 29 most of the season. It's not the age that messes with me. It's the age plus how bad the injury was. Now he's a free agent. Where does he go? Now, if he lands on a team with a good offensive line, I think I can get on board with Nick Chubb making a bounce back.
Yeah, I think the way he runs hard is something that you like, but I think when Chubb is a little bit hurting, I think you just say, hey, I think we're going to pass on him unless it's a really good situation. That's how I feel. I think his career might be done.
I hope it's not. I enjoy watching him play. I enjoy he was such a good runner. There are some teams out there that if he lands, I'll be open to drafting him, but it does have to be a really good offensive line, right? It has to be a situation where like Saquon Barkley is obviously has a lot more burst in him than Nick Chubb at this point without the injuries. But like if he goes to a great offensive line like Barkley, then maybe Chubb can end up having a big rushing or a rushing touchdown year for sure. We shall see where he goes and then I'll determine if he's a bounce back or not after that. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, listening to us on a podcast app, give us that like, review, all that good stuff. We will be getting into Super Bowl bets and FanDuel lineups and everything to do with the Super Bowl on Thursday and Friday. We'll talk to you then. Bye, y'all.